if the person that I am talking to receives it badly in some way, I've got to take a quick mirror to see if I'm sending it out in my alignment. If I feel I am, I've got to let them have their experience.
Hello, Business of Happiness Hivers. I am so excited because today we are talking to Pripo Teplitsky. And Pripo is a licensed clinical mental health counselor, and he specializes in relationships. And in this episode, you're going to see a side of Pripo that is just so honorable and humble and beautiful. And he shares with us some great techniques and tactics for any of you out there who are having trouble either in an intimate personal relationship or at work in business. He gives us some unique techniques on how to have difficult conversations, and not just difficult conversations, but how to address a difficult relationship. When you're at work and there's someone who you're just not aligning with, and you know you have to work together, how do we face these relationships, and how do we bring us back into alignment so that we can have commonality and find commonality? This is an incredible episode. He also talks about intimacy with your private relationships and how to find a deeper connection with the ones you love. I know you're going to find enormous value in this episode. Join me in welcoming Pripo Teplitsky. Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a spectacular day because we have with us the one and only Pripo Teplitsky that I am so grateful for. He's a licensed clinical mental health counselor specializing in relationships. And before we get going, I need to extend my gratitude in a very public way, Pripo, because you and I have recorded an interview before today, and the recording didn't fare well. The quality was not good enough to be sharing with my audience. And I want to say an enormous thank you to you for coming on again. Your generosity of time and of your expertise is just incredible and admirable. And I'm so honored. Thank you.
You're so welcome. So, as a fellow podcaster, I understand these things. So, I want to be as humble about it as possible. So, not to get bent out of shape when things just don't go well. And so, it's good that we're able to have this conversation again. So, I'm glad.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful. And the reason why I pursued you again is because of the value of your expertise that I know my audience needs to hear.
Mm.
One of the biggest challenges in business and in life is our interactions with our other fellow human beings, and relationship understanding and relationship skills and appreciation of one another. And you speak so beautifully to that. And, you you have this beautiful quote that I love, and I mentioned it last time we were talking, that you put on your emails, and it says, example is not the main thing in influencing others, it's the only thing. And I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about that quote from Albert Schweitzer, of how you see that in relationships in terms of building and supporting relationships.
Thanks for picking that up. I don't know many people that read at the end of an email and pick that up. So thanks. It was purposeful. Yeah, that's what I learned. I learned growing up that I didn't want to really listen to what people said because they were a little hypocritical of what they said, and as opposed to what they did. I think parents can understand that. We always say, "Do what I say, not what I do," or the old-fashioned parents would say that. But that didn't sit right with me. I really respected people that modeled what they were saying. So that stuck within me, and I wanted to take that on into my life with my family and friends. And what I see happening a lot is with my partner, with my wife, when she is doing something that is inspirational. What I consider inspirational is when she's able to drop a conflict really quick and come back into love quickly, and where we might get into a little conflict, and a couple of minutes later she says, "What, love?" When I talk to her, I'm thinking, man, how did you get to love that fast? Man, I want to do that. That's an inspiration to me. And so we inspire each other in that way of how we respond in situations, or the kindness that we show in our relationships inspires each other. And as a parent, I see that. I see that my way of being has modeled in a way that my son has learned. Maybe in some way that's an intention of mine, but not so purposefully. And that's been a beautiful thing. And I tell parents that too, is how you interact with each other as partners is what your kids are going to model and see as a relationship. How you just model showing kindness and love is how your children are going to be getting that software chip. So to me, that's really important.
What do you do if you realize you've been modeling the wrong thing?
Mm, I love that. Be authentic. Say you have. I think like that's the best thing that we can do is call ourselves out and just say, you know what? I apologize. That is not the way I want to be. I gave you funky energy. That is not how you deserve to be treated right now. I apologize. To me, apologies are huge and we don't do them well. Usually we just scoff it off in some way and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What do you want from me? I'm saying I'm sorry. That's not an
Mm,
apology. And so if we can own our stuff and take accountability, one, we'll have more self-compassion for ourselves. We're a human being. Human beings do stupid stuff and don't hit the bullseye all the time. If I can call myself out, that's also an inspiration for other people in my life to do that too, to give them permission and
mhm,
not feel shame and not feel aspects of guilt that I'm also going to stick the knife into them even more when they take accountability. So I think that's the best thing to do is call ourselves out.
mm,
It's power. It feels empowering to do that. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm monitoring my behavior. That's why I'm telling people around me. I'm going to monitor my behavior. You don't have to monitor my behavior.
It also gives us permission to be able to make mistakes in the future. And I don't mean as an excuse for it, but just as an opportunity to try to grow. Sometimes I think we hold ourselves back from growing because we're so afraid to make a mistake. We're
Mm.
so afraid to be something bigger or better for someone. So we don't even try because we're afraid to fail.
Exactly. Yeah. And that perfectionism, the seeds of perfectionism is around shame. So that's what we hide behind. We hide behind shame when we don't want to fail. And you can't take accountability when you're feeling shame because it's too painful to
Mm.
take accountability. So when we are humble enough to know that we're making mistakes, that we're human beings, we'll have more self-compassion and we can take accountability more in that way.
Yeah, and that's something last time you and I were talking, you shared with me as well. I wrote down humility is knowing our humanness.
Hmm. Yeah.
Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, I think, I'm 58 years old and as I walk more on this earth, I feel the power of humility, of being and connecting with all human beings in that um not to strive for again perfection, not to think that we're not going to make any mistakes whatsoever. That's
Mm,
how we're learning. That's how we show other people that we're human and connecting on the human level gets away from all of the surroundings of the shoulds and the accolades and the extrinsic value system, things that are outside ourselves, instead of our intrinsic value system, which is more the value system that I want to live by, my character, my attributes, my value system, internal value system. And for me, um, I used to love, I think I mentioned this last time too, about the Indian chief that just sits quiet and doesn't really speak, but he's very humble in that way because when he does speak, it's very profound.
mm,
And that to me was strength. And so I grew up with just this concept of I had a grandfather that was really quiet but he was strong when he spoke, just strong in his humbleness. He was just very humble. So I see humbleness as a strength and a strength to connect us into being human.
absolutely. No, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. You know, one of the things I wanted to discuss more with you today with I know many of my listeners struggle with this with relationships at work, with partnerships, with colleagues. When you have a relationship that's really knocking heads, where there just seems to be nowhere where you can find a commonality, but you will need to be able to work together. How do you guide people to find kind of a, I don't know, a level playing ground, or making a connection, or what words to use to reach out and give that olive branch? But how do you suggest that people find um, some relief in a relationship that feels very tense and you just can't seem to get beyond?
It's a great question. I used to be a corporate executive for some years, so I'm reflecting back on some of that. I do think as best as you can is to of course try to find that bridge of
Mm,
commonality. The humanness is one aspect of commonality. So I know when I was working with people, I always wanted to find out about their personal life in some way, their family, their kids, their desires, their fears, because I knew that I had something in common in some way with that, whatever that was. And so that bridge then got smaller of our differences. But also, I think authenticity to even say at times, hey, I know you and I don't get along so well. I know
mm.
that there's things that we don't like about each other, but we're working together and we have that goal to really want to do well in our work. How can we bridge that? So I think being honest in some way, because even I know when some people have said that or I said that to other people, like, hey, you and I are really different. I don't really respect some of the things that you said, but I respect the job that you do. And so how do we bridge that? Because we're going to be working with each other for a while. Right there, we come down to our humanness and authenticity, and people have respect for that when it's called out. I think when we avoid it and don't name it, that's when in the back of our unconscious mind, we really don't have respect for people because they're not naming reality. And once reality is named, even if you're not agreeing with it, you go, wow, I could trust that person because they're actually naming uncomfortable things. And right there is a connection.
I think that's such a great point. The fact that that is the connection, because we forget that if there's some discomfort being felt on our end, it most certainly is being felt on their end as well. So even that can be a connection.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we can find in some way attributes of a value system that people overlap in. Doesn't have to be interests, but it could be a value system. Somebody who is hardworking that we know, wow, they're dedicated, or somebody that I remember I was with a coworker that they were, I would say, a little bit pessimistic. Like every time we were in a project, we would want to talk about something or how things would go. They would all automatically come in with how it wouldn't work and the obstacles. And I remember my shackles got up a little bit being a project manager and say, man, you just coming in and squashing all this. But then I realized, you know what? That's actually good. Thanks for bringing in that voice because nobody else was bringing in that voice. You're bringing in the voice of, hey, we have to look to certain things that we're not looking at. Possibly some of the things that you're talking about maybe have credence. So thanks for being that voice. And actually, when I said that, that person's voice of pessimistic started getting more optimistic in some way because they were validated in that way. And I think when people are validated for what they feel, their realities, their experience, then they get to open up more because of that validation. The experience gets to be grounded in reality and then they can fully embrace who they are more.
That's so fascinating, because I think that typical human nature is just to look the other direction, to avoid that challenge, and to pretend it doesn't exist, or to glance past it. I can
Yeah.
see that picture that you're painting there, of being in a conversation, in a group discussion, having a goal, and there's that one negative voice, and the tendency is just to ignore it, keep focusing in the other direction. And yeah, that feels very dismissive. That feels very um, unwelcoming. And by just doing the exact opposite, you welcomed that person's opinion and gave them a new confidence, even to be in that conversation.
And it stops some of the ruminating of if I'm holding something with somebody, then that gets life. I might talk to other people about it. I might make it bigger and avoid it more. When we avoid things, they get bigger. But when we name them right there, like an attraction, a lot of times when they're building an attraction in their mind and it's getting a big fantasy, but once they name it, either say it to somebody or that person, boom, the attraction also has reality. It's just kind of sits. It doesn't have life of a fantasy. And I think the same thing with somebody that we might feel not aligned or that they irk us when we speak to it, then it realigns itself in some way. And I think that's, it's interesting. I used to have a real challenge with talkaholics, that I call people that incessantly would talk. What I mean by that would be, 10 minutes straight, no questions. There's no dialogue. They're not interested in what I have to say. And most of us avoid people like that. We make excuses like, I got an appointment, gotta go. And it was really uncomfortable for me. And one, I think it's uncomfortable for everybody. But I remember an instant because I had a friend who was a talkaholic, and I was really honest with him, and he was open to it. He knew he was a talkaholic. People would tell him to avoid, but he just couldn't help it. He had a great memory, so his stories just went all over the board. And finally, I told him, I said, how do we work this? How do I tell you that you're talking too much? And he said, just tell me to shut the hell up. I said, I don't really want to do that. That's just not my nature. And he said, we were both very much baseball fans, and he said, just say the word triple. I'm like, triple? He said, triple. It's the hardest thing in baseball to do. Stopping and pausing is the hardest thing for me to do. That will remind me to just pause. And so we would play that, and of course it would work for a little bit, and then I would have to, keep butting in the triple and triple, and we would have fun with it. But what I saw is that I had to be assertive, and to be an assertive in a certain way. So I started doing it with other people and say, hey, I just want to pause you for a second. In the last 5 minutes, you've been talking a lot about yourself, and you haven't engaged with me at all. You haven't asked me any questions. So I'm just curious, are you wanting a conversation with me? Are you curious of what I have to say or what I think? Because honestly, if you're not, I'm not interested in continue this dialogue. So when I would practice saying these kind of responses, because it wasn't judging the other person, I didn't have the animosity. I wanted to be straight and check in with them. This is what's happening. This is the reality that I'm making up in my mind. Would you like to have this dialogue? And most every time people are not offended. They're actually thankful for that response.
Wow, it's this really beautiful balance between humility and assertion of
Hmm.
your truth, because even in that example you were giving, he was being extremely humble as well to be able to hear your feedback and to
Right.
offer that opportunity of triple. That is a very humble perspective on his part as well. But I love this idea that you're demonstrating so beautifully of having that humility of humanness and oneness and understanding and seeing someone, even if they're unlike you,
Exactly.
and still being able to stand up for yourself in a loving but assertive way.
Yeah. And I think that's when you came back to the humility and humanness, when I do that well, I know that how I'm sending that out is not incongruent. I'm not having a contemptuous attitude or higher than, like, hey, you're talking a lot. And I'm not having that kind of attitude. I really want to do connect with this person. So if I can come with that humbleness of like, hey, I do want to connect with you. I'm just checking in that if you don't want to play the way that I think is good for us to play and having a conversation, then that's okay. Then let's go on our separate ways. But if you do, let's try that. So it is that assertiveness, but with humbleness around not having a contemptuous attitude towards somebody else.
How do you do that? I know you're saying it, but I'm reaching for more skills and tactics. How do you do that? How do you know that when you present your truth to someone that you're coming across with that humility? Is just having the intention enough, or is there a special skill of engagement that allows you to share that loving perspective that you don't want to get you don't have an ulterior motive. You just want to have the same common goal.
Well, Perrin, I think it's a practice. It's
Mm.
it's a real practice to do over and over and over again throughout, because we do have to check ourselves. What I mean by that is I have to check my intention. I have to check um, my willingness. If my self-talk is more negative and judgmental, I have to register that. If I have some of that, but more of my intent is overriding, like saying, "Wait, okay, this person is not a bad person. They're just a human being. Maybe they didn't learn the skills of communication. Maybe they have anxiety. Maybe they had lower self-esteem. If I can have some of that perspective and then align what I call send out within my value system. So when I communicate, I want to I want to I want to align myself in clarity and honesty and compassion and kindness and authenticity. So when I'm talking, I I have the saying, speak my truth and find my truth as I'm speaking. So I'm speaking and I'm registering in some way. Am I aligned with my value system as I'm sending it out?
If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know.
If the person that I am talking to receives it badly in some way, I've got to take a quick mirror to see if I'm sending it out in my alignment. If I feel I am, I've got to let them have their experience, whatever that is, if it's upsetness or whatever. But if I know within myself that I'm sending it out. So for me, it is that practice of really understanding that alignment. And one way is to make sure that my self talk is not, the majority of my self talk is not negative or judgmental or contemptuous. And one way to do that too is relaxing the body. The body holds the emotions. So if I'm more contracted in my body, then the emotions of anger, frustration, upsetness happens. If I'm relaxed in my body, I can't experience those emotions. They can't exist in that kind of body. So one is also practicing a lot of times shaking and moving and taking deep breaths so that it's relaxed in the body and not holding. In conversations, I take deep breaths a lot. When somebody is speaking, I take a deep breath. I let it in and take a deep breath. So I'm not holding. And interruption happens when short breaths, right? People are they're taking short breaths and they're trying to come in with each other. And very little of each person is taking deep breaths. You're going to have this nice quick pause between the conversation. When I take a deep breath, I'm more my authentic self. I come from that place, not from a place of hyper anxiety. So those are my techniques.
I love what you just demonstrated so beautifully is also modeling of that energy, which supports the conversation. So when
Mhm.
you just took that deep breath, I took a deep breath. And I was just thinking how beautiful that would be in a challenging conversation. If you can offer yourself that bodily awareness, calm your body down, then that their body will mimic yours as well. That what you were just talking about at the top of the hour. And then even on an energetic level, if you're coming from a place of compassion, they could maybe feel that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even coming from the place of authentic compassion means, I can feel that there's energy between us and I'm having a difficult time having compassion of being present with you. I
Okay.
just want to name that right now because I would like to get to the place where I feel connected with you. But right now, there's a little bit of this blockage. Maybe we could just pause together and take a couple breaths. So just being authentic in that way and naming that name something that there's between the energy between and saying, I want to move past that. How can we do that? But I just want to name it. When somebody says that to me, and it's
Wow.
rare, but I'm like, wow, I really appreciate the authenticness
Mm.
in that. And that's the modeling because it allows me then to be authentic too and say, yeah, you're right. There is some energy between us, and I don't want that either. Boom, right there. Two human beings trying to connect on a more intimate level. Because intimacy is to know and to be known. To me, that's just the definition of intimacy, period. And to what level we want to be known and in what level we want to know, that's up to each individual.
Hmm.
And I know that there can be constraints and blockages. Some people don't want to go there with us to the depths of that. But a lot of times we don't want to go to the depths within ourselves. For instance, if I want an intimate conversation with you, and let's just say that I'm not feeling that coming from you, that you're not being in that energy field, I can still be intimate with myself. I can self-disclose and say, "Hey, Tarryn, right now you and I are talking, and there's something about our exchange that doesn't feel as authentic, and I'm sad about that. And I don't know how else to be able to communicate in the way that I would like us to sink down on a deeper level. You don't have to join me back to that
Hmm.
depth. You can say, well, I don't want it, or I don't know what you're talking about. But I just had intimacy with myself. I just self-disclosed in front of you. Whether you came back to me, that's shared intimacy. I can still feel intimate. So I can leave the conversation, maybe not fully fulfilled, but at least I had an intimate conversation because I self-disclosed in front of you to myself.
Hmm.
I feel intimate with myself. And if I feel intimate with myself more often, then that's who more I'm going to be. And hopefully I'm going to rendezvous with more people that want to join me in that. And that gets away from the imposter syndrome, right? That we're not showing up in our relationships the way that we want to. And that we think that we constantly need somebody else to join us in that for us to be intimate. We don't. It's a big deal to take the risk to do it ourselves and not being met, sure. But if we're if we're the judges of that within ourselves, am I showing up the way that I want to today? Did I have the depth of conversation? Did I appreciate this person to the depths? Did I speak my truth? I think that's a pretty good day.
Yeah, it's so beautiful because it's also very respectful of the other person. It's you just said let them have the experience, so they
Yeah.
get to choose. We don't get to own or control their response or their experience, but we do get to do so for ourselves.
Right.
Yeah,
And I get to choose too on that level how they choose. Do I want to choose to keep
right.
playing with them in conversation, right? Without judgment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so beautiful. It reminds me of something else that you said in our last conversation. You said it's difficult, if not impossible, to find the intimate partner. Now we're talking about intimate partners specifically because you brought up intimacy, but it's difficult, if not impossible, to find the intimate partner you want if you avoid looking within yourself and changing your own behaviors. And as you're mentioning to us now, finding that intimacy with yourself.
Yeah.
Difficult to find intimacy with someone else if you can't do it for yourself.
Yeah. There's a lot of times when I'm working with people that don't have a partner and that they want to have a partner. And I know that there are techniques inside of ourselves about how to get clear what kind of partner that we want. We write it down, we put a treasure map up. But I think it's much more powerful to be the person that we want to be, and that will attract that similar value system in somebody else. So when and or even in relationships, if one partner wants the other partner to change, I tell that partner, do you just keep being the partner that you want to be? You want more kindness from that other person? You be kindness. That's the
Mm-hmm.
modeling part. So a lot of that to me is how can I expect my partner to go any deeper in intimacy than I'm willing to go? So I have to do that. I have to see my own blockages. I have to see my own resistance. I have to see the depths of my willingness so that I can actually be available for that person to meet me in that way. So I think I think a lot of couples work, intimate work is on our own side, is on our individual side. For instance, many people don't focus on the influence and the power they have in their responses to what their partner says and does, as opposed to looking at what their partner says and does. If my wife somehow, let's say, is not present with me, if I just tell her, I can't believe that you're not present with me, why aren't you being present with me, I'm going to get a certain response back from her. I'll probably get defensiveness. But if I say to her, hey, I'm just noticing right now, what I make up in my mind is that you're not so present with me right now. I don't know what's going on with you. I'm willing to hear about that, but I would love a level of sinking in if you're willing to do that. I'm going to get a whole different response back.
Hmm.
So I have so much control, or I would say influence, not control. I have so much more influence on shifts of somebody's behavior by how I respond to the behavior I don't like or don't want. And that's the part of the side of the net that I'm talking about, of changing those things.
And even in that, even a responsibility, would
Tell
you
me
say,
more. The
in terms of the way you respond? Yeah.
right, right, exactly. And it's empowering. If I'm
Mm.
if I'm feeling like, wow, I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I have influence of, in some way, experiencing more than I want instead of giving away my power to other people that they're not giving me the experience that I want. Then it does allow for more responsibility. And when two people are taking responsibility in that way, that's an empowered relationship.
Mm.
When two people, when I interact in a way that empowers the people around me, that's true empowerment. If I act in a way and feel power that I disempower the other person, that's an entanglement. That is not true power.
Mm.
So I think that that's a practice too of how can, when I feel my power, because a lot of times people feel their power through anger, through self-righteousness, through blame, and that's power over somebody. And we can tell when that other person is, you know, decreasing in the way that they're responding to us, suppressing their feelings and their emotions, as opposed to joining us and them feeling empowered also.
And when you feel that, you'd say that's when you drop back into humility and honesty and just find out what's going on, what's happening here.
Exactly. And in
Mm.
some way celebration, because wow,
Mm.
we're celebrating two vulnerable, wonderful people trying to be more human. And to me, that there's a celebration there. There's an appreciation of like, yeah, we might not be doing it right, or we might have had a funky encounter, but like, hey, what about this? Like, isn't this is a little different than what we usually have. So let's celebrate this. And so celebration, I think, is a really important part. My wife is so great at celebrating things. And I mean, little celebrations. And she'll do little rituals around it, whether it's a lighting of a candle or, you know, just even the ritual of saying, let's celebrate this. Let's celebrate this new thing that came into our life, this thought, this way of being. And that was new to me. It's like, yeah, let's celebrate that level of awareness that we just had. Let's just celebrate that we had a win in this conversation, or this conflict that I had with somebody. Actually, it turned out pretty well. Let's celebrate that instead of going on to the next thing and the
Mm.
next thing to resolve and the next thing to resolve. That's a tiring life, to just keep going to resolve, 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 instead of like, whoa, there was a transformational process here. Let's note that. Let's name that. Let's celebrate that.
Oh, I love that practice. I'm so glad you brought that up because it just sparked so many things for me. Number one, the celebrations are the memorable moments too. Those are the ones I'm thinking about. A silly celebration. My husband and I were traveling when the kids were really little, and we traveled overseas with three little kids. And at the end of the flight, of this 23-hour flight, we high-fived each other. I remember that high five. To this day, I remember that little 5-second celebration. We did it. And it's funny how much that colors a relationship when you have those moments strung along.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
You know that I'm a huge proponent of appreciations and the verbal expressions, and we do that very often when we have an outing, whether it's a day outing or going on a trip to visit family. Afterwards, in the car, we talk about and we appreciate each other, appreciate the highlights of the experiences. So it is the high five of what we just experienced. And then you leave with that feeling of like, yeah, that aspect of
Mm.
really appreciating what was. And then you
Mhm.
start seeing more of that,
Mm.
because of course we know the opposite happens. If
Yeah.
we left the family's house and all we did was complain and judge, we're going to see more of that. That's how the human mind works. It just expands for what it sees.
Pattern
So we
recognition.
exactly. So we have to be the gatekeeper of that. We have to change that habit and pattern of putting the lens on, of scanning our environment, especially our relationships, of what we like and what we appreciate, what we're inspired by. Because if we scan that, we're going to see more of that. And that's what everybody wants. It's
Mm.
just a habit because we're animals, and animals scan their environment for danger. So as human beings, we scan our relationships for what's not working so that we can protect ourselves. But it doesn't in the long run really work well for human beings in relationships.
Mm. No, that's beautiful. I'm so grateful once again to you for this. Every time I speak to you, Pripo, I learn so much more and I get such a deeper understanding of relationships, for which I'm so grateful to you. I would love for you to share with us, please, how can my audience find you? Of course, we'll put all your contacts in the show notes, but how can my audience find you to learn more about you, and tell us also about your podcast so we can hear, because some of those incredible episodes that I've learned so much from. Thank you. How can we find you online?
Well, one way to find me online is pripo.com, pripo.com, and tell about my work there, which is going to be expanding. I'm going to be doing some coaching also in different areas of relationship, whether it's group coaching, online groups. I'm going to be doing some of that. Um, and I have my podcast, Relationships, Let's Talk About It, which is on all of the platforms or most of the platforms. Um, and it's twice a month where I have conversations with guests, or I do solo casts, which I like to do those too. It's maybe about 30 minutes of each. I call them heart shares. I just kind of riff off and say my thoughts and my feelings, and I like to disclose more about my life in some of those ways. So that's one way that people can really hear more about me. I'm on Instagram and Pripo Teplitsky. I don't have a Facebook page anymore, so I'm not really. My son is my social media coordinator, so he's stepping up in different ways and showing me how to do things. So that's the best way to.
Well, I do want to give a shout out. One of my favorite episodes on your podcast, one of your solo podcasts, "The Art of Being Alone with Yourself to Better
Hmm.
Relationships." It's
Ah,
one of my favorites. So, for listeners out there who are looking to dive into the excellence and the perspective that is Prepo, please check that one out.
oh,
And
there's one more thing that
oh
I
yeah,
I also do online workshops for couples, Zoom workshops now. I started that this past year, and I did appreciation, the power of appreciation, and that went off really well. So now I'm also going to do starting April 24th, and I believe May 15th. It will be up on my website, the art of apology, and it's a 4-hour workshop for couples on really learning how to do good, deep, intimate, profound healing apologies, because I don't think we learn that well. So I'm excited about that workshop coming up
oh,
too.
that would be so powerful. So you mentioned that earlier. Just saying I'm sorry is not
Mhm,
enough. Yeah.
mhm.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, we'll put the link to that in the show notes as well. So for our audience members who that speaks to. Prepo, what is your definition of happiness?
I think my definition of happiness is aligning again with my authenticity. When I feel like I was myself today, I was Prepo. I In this conversation, in this interaction, I felt that I showed myself. I was aware and allowed myself to allow the other person in. uh, I get juiced by that. That creates a lot of happiness for me of just showing up authentically and having an authentic encounter. If I could do that, and it's wonderful being a therapist because I get to guide that a little bit throughout my day. I'm having intimate, real conversations, and if people don't know how to do that, I help guide them there. So in some way, that's happiness for me of doing that, and but having the equality of relationships with people, because the therapeutic relationship is a little different. When I have the equality relationships, and have those authentic moments with people. That's happiness. Another side note is I love hanging with my family. I love hanging with my wife. We've been together 27 years, and we just celebrated our 26th wedding anniversary a few days ago. And I just love talking with her and finding out more and more what makes her tick, and working in our journey. And my son, who's living in Netherlands, and with his beautiful girlfriend, and I love hanging with my family. That's happiness for me because we're kind, and we're authentic, and we're fun, and we're interested in each other. So I want more of those times, and yeah.
And the celebration of them and realizing the
Mm.
preciousness of them. Mm,
Hmm.
mm,
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you, my friend. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
sharing your
Thank you.
truth with us. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing your insight
Great
and your
question.
perspective.
I appreciate the questions and the dialogue.
It's
Yeah.
always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for sharing so much insight with my audience. And
You're
thank
so
you.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining us here today. And please, if this has spoken to you, if you've learned something, share it with somebody who you know needs to hear this message as well. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye bye.
Bye bye.